created it because there was a response to a troubling reality that there's a lot of data breaches going on in the ecosystem, and they're increasing, not declining. We have a new one this week that we'll be talking to, unfortunately. There's just too many organizations that just keep losing sensitive information due to attacks. And all of these, or almost all of these, could have been prevented if they were doing the right things. And this is why I have started these sessions so I can help educate the community on what they should be doing, not just the Salesforce community, but the IT community as well, that's helping to manage these Salesforce environments and providing all those security reviews to help ensure that the orgs are safe. So each session, we're looking at real world breaches, Salesforce security best practices, and today even an ICT security framework, bringing into the Salesforce world, where we're also bringing in experts that can provide you with actionable steps. And I think that's the key, is actionable steps that you can take today to strengthen your security and reduce the risk that you have a breach yourself in the Salesforce environment. So now, just rules of engagement, go through this every week. Be respectful to others. It's open engagement. What that means is you can talk whenever you feel free. Just treat it like it's a Dreamforce session or a dreaming session. You want to ask a question, just raise your hand. We'll answer that question. Also, make sure you take good notes, walk away with something actionable that you can implement today. At the end, we're going to have, as always, a Q&A session that's open to any question that you have about Salesforce security or anything else. And also, as always, this is recorded and be rebroadcasted, so just be mindful of what you share. All right, who am I? My name is Matt Meyers. I am the CEO and founder of EzProtect, also a certified technical architect with over 18 years experience in the Salesforce ecosystem. I'm also the author of this book that I keep showing every time, which is the Salesforce Securing Salesforce Digital Experiences, which is about a personal experience of mine where a customer of mine, and when I was doing consulting, had a data breach. And this is actually what started me on the path of helping educate people on what they should be doing to ensure that they keep their data safe. Because as you can see, it's very personal to me. So, because I was in a breach, and which is not fun. All right, so since I am the CEO and co-founder of EzProtect, EzProtect is sponsoring all of these sessions. A lot of people don't know that Salesforce doesn't scan for viruses or malicious links or phishing links in your Salesforce ecosystem. And what we do is we help you ensure that your files that come into Salesforce are virus free, or at least blocked, so that they don't cause another data breach in Salesforce, and that your links also are scanned in real time so someone doesn't actually get a phishing attack in Salesforce, just like some of these customers that you've seen. If you're interested, you can always click on that QR code, reach out to us, and have a quick chat. So. All right. So a little bit of a recap of last week. We dug into a little bit some deeper topics about kind of some things that you can do to proactively prevent a breach, but more importantly, things of what you should be doing after a breach occurs. A lot of people don't think about, and this is actually going to tie really well into today's conversation about what you should be doing if you actually get a data breach. And then there's a lot of things that you need to do. For example, to is a lot of the cleanup, like resetting everyone's passwords, killing sessions, rotating secrets, restoring code that was changed. I mean, restoring like data that was changed. Maybe someone altered data, stole data. Maybe you got a ransomware attack, encrypted data. Looking for other things that people could be doing, that like connected apps that are installed, that are rogue apps, and a lot of other stuff like that. So really, that session last week was really centered around a lot of the things that you need to be thinking about after that breach happens, and a few things you can do before to ensure that that breach doesn't happen in the first place. So if you want to watch the session, there's a QR code. All right, so one other thing, hot off the press, this happened, just found out this about a few days ago. Unfortunately, we have found another attack that just happened, which Farmers Insurance found out that they were also a victim of the phishing attack to trick employees into installing another OAuth app in Salesforce. I wish a lot of these companies would be paying attention to the news and watching these sessions here, because then hopefully these things wouldn't be happening. Soon, if you were in the last session, I believe we talked about Salesforce is rolling out a new feature that's going to help stop a lot of this stuff, which is including the ability where pretty much if you are not an admin, you won't be able to install any kind of I would say uninstalled connected app. So that's kind of what this how this is happening is those less privileged users that are not as understanding your system are installing those apps, but also this change Salesforce is going to roll out. That's not going to help protect you against an admin though getting installing one of these apps. So you still need to be careful, but at least this will limit your non-privileged users from installing this. But sadly, one more breach here that just appeared a few days ago. All right, so let's dive into today's talk, which is the threat response lifecycle. Like, what is it, and how do you use it in Salesforce security? As I mentioned, this is not a Salesforce framework. This is something coming from the IT security world. So let's talk about a little bit what is the threat response lifecycle. This is something I've been doing a lot of research on lately, and it's actually a framework, a security framework that is defined by NIST and I always forget what they stand for. I think it's the National Institute for Security and Technology or something like that. But basically, if you look at any federal government, NIST is what governs all of the security controls that the federal government uses. Or if you've heard of FedRAMP, that's what FedRAMP is actually basing a lot of their controls on. So NIST puts out all these guidelines and frameworks and other things that help people to keep their data safe and more even just react when something happens. So if you look a lot of the frameworks out there, a lot of the frameworks are not only centered around protecting yourself from a breach, but also a lot of it is about what happens after the breach happens. So I've noticed a lot of customers of ours specifically and others that are using security products, they set it and forget it. Like, for example, Shield, they install it, but they never look at it again. Or they have, for example, our product and they install it and they put an email alert and that's it. They don't go back and say, okay, what? So maybe a file got uploaded in Salesforce that was a virus. We caught it, we stopped it. But what other systems did that user install that virus into? Has that virus been contaminated to the rest of the organizations? So think of it again like an airplane with someone with COVID. You have COVID tracing. You want to make sure where everyone that was exposed to COVID, was tracked down and quarantined off. And you want to do the same thing with your Salesforce. But then you also have a lot of other phases that we're going to go through in a minute in addition to that. So really this framework is more about what you do once you have a breach to minimize the damage and recover from the damage rather than just stopping the breach altogether. Because I have some bad news for you guys if you've not heard me talk about this before. Someday you will have a breach. It is impossible to stop every breach. It's really about what you do to ensure that you can identify it quickly and recover from that breach. All right, so so I think I went a little bit into this, but what is the threat response lifecycle, for Salesforce? And this is kind of a little bit, I'm diving a little bit deeper into this, but it's basically a practical security playbook that professionals can use first to prepare your organization to do everything you can to stop a breach. That means including turning on multi-factor authentication, least privilege session settings, IP configurations, having connected app audits, backing up your data, your metadata, virus scanning, all that kind of stuff. And then the next part is ensuring that you can, detect a suspicious activity. That's using like event monitoring, which lets you understand if you have login anomalies, weird IP calls that are happening, other things. Then, that's the detection side of things. And actually, you could put virus scanning in it as well. Once you detect a virus that comes in, same kind of thing there. Then the next thing is, okay, now you've detected a threat. What happens next? Well, now you want to contain them. You're going to freeze users, revoke tokens, lock out connected apps, other things like that. And then the most important part of it is learning from it. Are you actually learning so you don't repeat the same mistakes again? Are you retraining your users? And this is how you need to start thinking about it from a Salesforce perspective. Okay, so why does this all matter? I've talked about these metrics before. So it's 200 days on average to detect a breach. Why is that? That's because people are not doing what I just talked about in the previous slide. They're not constantly monitoring their systems, ensuring. I mean, remember Coca-Cola? It was someone was in their system for a very long time. They didn't even realize it. I mean, and then 74% of breaches involve human elements. That goes back to training, understand your users are doing the right things, and then thinking about what are the things your users may fall victim to, so you can block for that beforehand, and then be able to monitor for it, so you know when the user does something they shouldn't, that opens yourself up to attack. We see here phishing attacks have been up 109%. So basically the whole thing here is the longer the delay, the bigger the breach and the higher the fines. So I'm going to go back to farmers a second ago. How long have the news articles been out about all the phishing attacks in Salesforce with the data loader application out here that people are trying to getting their users to install? I mean, if this is really a thing of the corporations not paying attention and then delaying making changes. If they would have locked out all their IPs and started doing the things that a lot of people are recommending, they would not have been victim to this attack that has been going on for months now. All right. So just again, the just to show the slide that the slide you do not want to be on, that this just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Just take a look at the logos. These are the companies that are getting hit in these attacks, and almost all of these, as I said, could have been prevented. So, all right. So that was already a duplicate. Sorry about that. Okay. So here's really when you start want to think about this. So why are we talking about this? This is a not non-Salesforce security framework, but the reason why we care about this is because most companies they have an incident response plan playbook for their IT, their network, and even upper applications. I've been talking to other IT professionals, and they said, yeah, we have very strict protocols for like AWS, for SAP. But then when it comes to Salesforce, they said they don't really have a formalized playbook for Salesforce. And this is where breaches like, Coca-Cola and Qantas start happening, and they show, that's where these failures, start happening. Like, I mean, if you look at here, Qantas and Coca-Cola, they failed in the detection and containment phases. If they would have, been able to detect it sooner and then contain that breach, then the damage wouldn't be as much. But the reason why we don't see this though in the Salesforce ecosystem as much because you've got a lot of Salesforce specific challenges. You have things like complex permissions and sharing models. You have all these connected apps that create these hidden attack ways. You have viruses and phishing. Your malicious can come in and expose things in other ways. Your users themselves fall victim to voice phishing attacks, give out their password on the phone. So I think this is why you need this playbook, and the threat response lifecycle gives your admins and security teams a repeatable framework that you can use to identify and stop these kinds of attacks. All right. And so this is a really good metric to think about. So organizations with a mature incident response plan in place demonstrate that they had a 50% reduction in the time to resolve and achieve cost savings, for, up to 58% for an incident. So basically this means if you have a adequate response plan in place, you you will reduce the time to detect and resolve an incident by over 50%. And that's a really big number to think about. So, okay, so let's break down what this threat response lifecycle is and step by step. So there's four primary steps or phases, let's say, in this. The first is preparation. I think that one is pretty self-explanatory. That's creating all of like your policies, your written policies. Think about your password policies, session management policies, other, permission policies. It's how you implement Salesforce. It's putting in monitoring in place, user training, backups, virus scanning, other things into Salesforce. Everything you can possibly do and think of to stop a data breach in Salesforce. Then once you've done everything you can to prepare, it's just like your children. You want to protect them as best you can, but someday they're going to get hurt. Now, what do, once that happens? Well, it's a know immediately that they got hurt really quick. It's the same thing with your org. As fast as you can, remember that 204 days on average to detect a breach. You want it to be much quicker, right? You want to be within the same day if possible. as fast as possible. And that's where you have event monitoring. It's not just installing Shield or other monitoring tools, it's installing them and making sure that you have alerts that are immediately firing off, immediately telling you when something's happening. Having people go in and manually be looking at your system, reviewing access logs, looking at your users that are in the system, looking at anomalies like API calls that shouldn't be happening. A lot of API calls from the same IP that normally would have lower calls. Other things you can do. Splunk, there's Splunk monitoring. That's other outside of Salesforce you can do as well, looking at things. Next is containment and eradication. Now you've gotten your analysis and detection done. Everyone's been notified. You know that you now have an issue. Well, what do? You need to stop it. And that's containment. A shield and other tools can automatically do things like locking accounts. There's other, tools. There's also manual ways of doing it. So the first thing you want to do is stop that attack. If it's a connected app like we've been seeing, you quickly, revoke the token. You uninstall the app. You lock user account, all your user accounts, or reset all their passwords. Um, Revoking access tokens, anything else that you could potentially be doing to contain that breach so it doesn't get worse. Well, now though you've been breached, data's been stolen, maybe data's been changed, maybe they put some rogue tokens in your system. Well, now that's eradication. That's getting, think of it like a virus. You take antibiotics, you're getting rid of every trace of that virus so that person can't get back in. So imagine you first revoked all these tokens, but then you didn't lock the accounts and they got it back in and they were still able to get your system even after you did everything. So there's an order of operations you need to be doing to ensuring that you've contained and removed all trace of that breach. Then last and not and last is really recovery and lesson learns. Now this is like restoring your clean data, getting everything back to operational, turning your users back on, updating any bugs where there were issues in the system, and then very important, educating your teams. I mean, this is, I think, the most critical component a lot of people miss is the education of your teams to say, okay, we had a breach. This is what you need to do, ensuring that they understand it, not only took the test, but actually conceptualized it. Test them and retest them. Make sure they actually understand it. Do fake attacks as a lot of companies do, but a lot of companies you do fake phishing attacks in your email, but do you ever see anyone do any kind of fake attacks in Salesforce? You should do like fire drills and give people calls, try to do a phishing attack against them, doing other types of things. See or make sure users understood what they learned so that they're not going to fall victim. So this is more of a visual of it, and it's a little bit more expanded, but it does have the same phases. See, preparation, detection, analysis, containment, eradication, lesson learns. But I kind of broke this down a little bit more because to something that's a little bit more understandable. So first we could go through preparation, then identification, but most important step that's kind of broken into the analysis is notification. You need to quickly, as soon as that issue has been identified, as fast as possible, notify them. That could be via email or something else, but email is I would be careful of, because if you send an email, how do you know that someone's actually going to act? You need that step to ensure accountability. Somebody needs to be accountable so that they can wake up the rest of the team, that they can know it. If you just shoot an email out, I don't think that that could go unnoticed. I think you should probably be doing more text, voice calls. Maybe you throw some AI in there. I don't know. But I mean, I think that's the point that I see that drops off a lot. You'll set up a system, do an email alert, and that's it. And then something happens, and then it says, "Oh, the other guy's got it." Well, that's something that needs to change. And then, as we said, we go through containment. That's containing the breach so it doesn't keep spreading. Eradication. That's eliminating the threat, getting all traces of it out. Recovery again that's restoring your data, going back to a normal state, reactivating your users. And then our most important step, I feel, which is the lessons learned. If you don't learn from it, it's not going to happen again. And remember, ensuring you train all your users. Okay, so so let's just take. I just want to do a quick recap here of a breakdown of the current breaches, and then where those fell short a little bit. So first off, we have our Coca-Cola breach. So that was just a regular, plain old phishing attack where someone phished Coca-Cola and they got undetected access for quite a long time, where they were able to steal 23 million records from Coca-Cola. So if they had proper detection and then more quickly were able to contain that breach, then you probably would not have seen 23 million records. Maybe it would just be a few hundred, maybe a few thousand, would not be in the millions if they were able to quickly detect and contain that breach, especially if you had more automation in there, like Shield and then locking out users automatically. Quantus was that malicious data loader application where it was, I think a lot of it is training, but also was more on preparation. So they were not didn't have the feature Salesforce has had for a while where you can blacklist or IP restrict uh, connected applications for being installed. They didn't have on their profiles, even if you have a connected app, if your profiles are IP restricted, then that would also stop that attack from happening, because even though the connected app still needs to use a profile, so across a user. So if that user had IP restricted, that wouldn't have happened. So I think there's a lot of things, but even if, let's say, you didn't, again, still looking and understanding, as soon as this data started leaving your org, you should have other things that detect that anomaly, and that would have stopped it quickly. And then Disney, this wasn't Salesforce, but this was Slack related. If you remember, there was a piece of malware that was downloaded from GitLab that looked like an AI generation tool, and then the user downloaded the file onto their computer, and then the virus scanner on their computer didn't detect it, which is actually fairly common. Desktop virus scanners are not as good, and especially if it's a personal system, but even corporate systems, I see a lot of times corporate systems, their virus scanner does not detect a virus, and we do. And so I think that you need multiple layers of protection. And here it was, they missed that preparation of of an adequate virus scanning system. And then second off, they had multi-factor authentication was not enabled in Slack with IP security. Otherwise, the attacker would not have been able to get in. And so this, and then again, I think there was a lot of data was stolen from Slack. So again, they were not monitoring it to see when that data was leaving. I mean, I think it was like a terabyte or 2 terabytes. I forget exactly that was stolen from Disney, but that's a large amount of data that if you had monitoring in place, you would have been able to see quickly. Okay, so let's see, how do you apply this in a Salesforce, in the Salesforce world? So this is great that you've got this really nice life cycle and everything, but if you don't know how to apply it in Salesforce, then I don't think it's any use to you. So, so the first thing is, thinking about a lot of the best practices that I've been talking about over the last 6 weeks. So auditing your connected apps, specifically audit all your users. What kind of OAuth do they have enabled today? I bet you'd be surprised if you go in and look at your own user account and other user accounts, what applications have access to for your users. Turn on make sure the new setting that's coming out at the end of September is being turned on. So non-privileged users can't install OAuth or connected apps, but also go back and also turn on the restriction and where all connected apps that are installed are IP restricted, or you have like a white list for them. Look at what apps are installed, looking at your privileges in Salesforce, looking at what kind of permissions are you giving out. If you look at the user access report, you can click on any user, you can see what kind of access. I think I've talked about this before, but on average, there was a study done by Elements.cloud, and they found that on average, there's 20 non-admin type users that have view all data in an org. So that already opens up your org. Another thing to think about is, even though you may trust your users, you shouldn't be giving them access to read all of your accounts. So imagine your user gets a breach for your user. They've been phished, and now they have access to your entire customer database. Versus if they only had access to a small portion of your customer database, then that breach is much less. So that's thinking again about containing that breach. That's part of that preparation part. In getting something like Shield in there for event monitoring, make so you know what's happening in your org as it's happening in real time. And so if there's some anomalous API activity going in. If like basically, back to my book here, one of my customers, they had their guest user was misconfigured and over 5,000 records were stolen from Salesforce. If they had Shield enabled properly and were looking at for suspicious API activity, that actually could have been caught. So that's another big one. And then, of course, having, for if you're uploading files and you have forms where you're taking links, you should have some kind of virus and phishing software installed into Salesforce to be able to scan in real time and block those malicious links and files coming in. Because just like we talked about with Disney, as soon as that's downloaded, then that user can get access to all your passwords on your local machines. And then, of course, data backup for that kind of that data virus scanning and data backup. That's really helping with those three big things that everyone always talks about with data integrity, your confidentiality, and availability of your data. Because if you have, for example, a phishing attack and then that ends up in a ransomware attack, well, data backup's going to help save you there. But if you don't have, it's better if you don't have that happen in the first place, and that's kind of where the virus and phishing scanning comes into play. All right, so then let's move on to detection and analysis. What does that really mean? Salesforce, I'm going to go back to Shield, monitoring for API anomalies, looking for IP addresses that are coming from other countries, for example. You shouldn't be, if you have well, your users are located in the US, then probably you don't want to be, have IPs from other countries coming in. You could actually implement things in Apex, for example, when somebody logs in, you could make an API call out or have a flow that goes out to a database to look at where that IP is from. And if that user is coming in from, for example, China, and you don't have any users in China, that's probably a pretty good sign that you probably shouldn't let that login happen. Looking at again, looking at kind of what record people are accessing. That's something else you can do with Shield, and then other kinds of anomalies. And Shield isn't the only thing out there, but of course that's you kind of need Shield to get the data. But then there's other really nice apps out there that do things like Varonis is one I really like. App Omni. There's others as well out there that can help enhance what you're using with Shield. Routinely looking at health check and Salesforce guest user access reports. And another thing is, I mean, don't discount manual. I mean, you should be a review of all your users that are active in Salesforce. Looking at, is there something that was missed somewhere else? Looking at your setup access log, looking at other things. I mean, I think this is the key part again to that 204-day metric of why people have breaches that go on for 204 days. People are in your house walking around. You don't even know they're there for 204 days. That if you get this right, that's going to be down to days, if not hours or less. And imagine the amount of data or the amount of the breach will how small it will be. It's not going to be 24 million records. It's going to be hundreds or thousands. That's going to save your company millions of dollars because these breaches typically, if you look at the metrics out there, you're not talking about a few $1,000s. Typically, long-term effects are in the 100 million or more, especially if you think about customers lost. You have to regain your customers back. Fines like GDPR. I mean, this stuff's very expensive. So if you can stop it right at the front as soon as it happens, you're going to save your company a ton of money and also think about the people themselves, like you and me. Like with the breach with Alliance Insurance, I was one of the victims. I wouldn't have been a victim if someone was doing appropriate detection analysis. Then next is the containment and eradication. Again, going back to Shield. I know I keep talking about it a lot, but it's a very good tool. So Shield has that ability to free suspicious users. You could also do things like with Apex, for example, or a login flow, like I was talking about. If someone's coming in from an IP that you shouldn't be coming from, you could freeze that user immediately. Don't let them logging in. When that new feature comes out with Salesforce, blocking non-admins from installing apps, blocking IP addresses. Once that eradication, like blocking uninstalling apps that shouldn't be in your org, revoking OAuth tokens. Because that's how they're going to get to your So even if you reset your password, if your OAuth token is not revoked, they can still access the account. Only if you freeze the user or you revoke that token, will they not be able to access it? Think about like also Shield encryption. Is your encryption keys, have those been compromised? You need to rotate those keys. Resetting all your user passwords. Thinking about everything, any way that someone could basically get into your Salesforce environment, whether it's API, whether it's through the login UI, whether it's a mobile app, whether it's through different certificates. So if you have certificate and certificate authentication, maybe you need to rotate those certificates as well. So that's really what this phase is about in a Salesforce way, is think about every possible way they can get access to your Salesforce environment. You need to rotate and reset everything, block everyone out. That way, no one can get access to it. That's that containment. And then eradication, of course, is getting rid of all the traces where they could get in. But if they planted some rogue code, look at your Apex code. Maybe they put a backdoor in your Apex code. Look at your setup log. What was changed? And then recovery, and that's again looking at, okay, how do you recover from everything that happened? So you've now gotten rid of everything, but maybe your data was changed, maybe you had Apex code that was changed. Maybe you have to do that. So a really good thing can be is your data. If you're using backups, a lot of these backup systems, they can tell you what was changed since the last backup. So you can look at that. You say, okay, there's metadata change here, these records were changed here. And so then you could easily, or pretty easily, figure out and restore what was changed if someone actually altered your data to do malicious things. Maybe you're storing credit card routing information and they changed it to a different bank account number so they could get the money sent to them. So these are things that you want to be thinking about in your Salesforce world as far as the recovery side of things. And then comes that lessons learned, the training part of it. Document, okay, how did that attack happen? What were all the things that changed? How did they get in? What could have you done better so that they couldn't have gotten in the first place? Making sure, again, you're training your users, letting them know about the breach, what happened with the breach, what could have been done to fix the breach. And then, as I said earlier, train them on those best practices of what they need to be thinking about and doing, and then test them, making sure that they are, just like your IT is testing you with your email system, you need to be testing your users to make sure that they are doing what they should to not be tricked into giving the data away too. And notice I do have in red here, yes, admins too. A lot of these breaches actually were admins that got compromised, and so your admins need to be trained just as much as your end users, ensuring that both you understand those best practices and what you should be doing to keeping your data safe in Salesforce. And then there's the follow through. If you don't follow through with this, with the stuff that's going on, then it doesn't matter, because you say, okay, we're going to do the training, but then no one actually gets trained. So okay, I'm going to pause here for 1 minute because we got a few questions here going on, and I do like to answer some of these questions as we get through. So I'll start with Nathan here. With data recovery also now being centralized into Salesforce, giving the own acquisition, how can an admin ensure they're protecting only their current org, but their archives as well? Well,
And Matt, so sorry to
yeah.
interrupt. Nathan, if you're comfortable too, I know you're probably traveling right now, but if you're comfortable too, you can always ask your question live.
Sure. Too. And just getting into a quiet spot here, Tristan. That's why I posted it on chat.
We appreciate you. Yeah. So no worries, Matt, go ahead. And for anyone else too, that by the way, if you feel free to unmute your mic, you can always ask the question live. Sorry to interrupt, Matt, back to you.
Yeah, sure. So basically, I mean, I think for right now anyway, Own is operating like a separate company from Salesforce. But I think I would take it wouldn't really. I would say it's the same thing with whether it's Own, whether it's some other backup company. You should really look at them the same. But I think first off is like you want to be making sure you're backing up your data regardless, and then it just depends on what your archives are looking like. I think Nathan, I'd want to understand a little bit deeper about what do you mean by what's your concern with the archives and Own, because they are right now separate systems. They're not in the same system. I don't know if you're able
Yeah.
to.
Where I'm going with that, Matt, is oftentimes they're viewed as connected applications, and that kind of ties into my second question. Is what I oftentimes hear from more junior admins is, I trusted the connected apps, so they went through a secured review, but now data is being leaked through connected applications. How can we explain this to admins, and what admins, or what can admins also do to further train themselves on security best practices going forward from these types of hacks?
Sure. So the first thing I would say is watch, I believe it was the last session or the session before where I talked about connected apps and kind of, or just applications in general and how you should better vet your vendors with your app exchange vendors coming into Salesforce. But I think, from just from the backup perspective, I think there is the danger that if you had a breach, you could be backing up bad data. I think it's really understanding first off from the backup perspective where at what point was a safe point when you should be doing that restore. And also, I think there's some concerns of the backup provider too. Is the same thing. It's like, okay, who can access that data in the backup provider? Is there a connected app that just launches you straight into the backup provider from your Salesforce org? So if someone breached your org, then they can get into your backup provider and get to all your backup data, which is, I think, even a bigger concern. So I would personally try to separate them as much as possible, have separate logins if you can. I would not advocate for a easy launch from your Salesforce org straight into your backup provider. And maybe that's what you were getting to. So,
100%. Thanks.
yep. Um, I knew someone would ask this. Isn't Shield incredibly expensive? It's a consumption basis for each event monitored. How do you compare what Shield costs versus a data breach cost? Well, I mean, security is expensive. I think that's just the best way to say it. It's like what's your data worth if you have a breach? I mean, what's your the cost of a breach to you? So I mean, look at again, Coca-Cola and these larger companies. If you're a large company and you have a breach, you lose 20 million records, and there's a metric out there that says that you'll lose from anywhere from 1% to 10% of your customers. We actually have a survey going on right now where we're trying to validate that data even further. So imagine if you were a large billion-dollar company, how much money will you lose if you lose 1% of your customers? And then how much money to gain that 1% back? You're talking a lot more money than Shield costs. But let's say you just don't have it in the budget. Let's say you can't get it from someone. I mean, unfortunately, you'll be limited to some of the things you can see and do because Shield gives you data that you just don't can't get to without Shield. I think there's other things you might be able to do. Like one thing someone was talking about is if you have a backup provider, you could have a backup field instead, I think we called it a canary field in our last talk, where you basically put this field, don't put it on the layout, that's very juicy, like credit card number or password or something like that, that someone would want to access. And then maybe look with your backup provider, you can see if that field changed. And if that field changed where it should never be changed, then maybe that was something you could do. Unfortunately, you really wouldn't be able to know when it was accessed, and that would be the better control. But I mean, I think unfortunately, it's only so much you can do, with these. So, um, the last one is like,
But
what? Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, but with that, it's still falling on the admin to review their own org. Nothing within Shields really kind of showcasing outdated vendor packages and things of
No.
that nature as well.
Correct. And that is going to go back to your preparation phase. So if we're thinking, remember, let's go through, you're going through all these phases. Shield is a little bit more, it's part of preparation, but it's also part of detection. So yes, you're preparing, but there's other things you need to prepare for too. Lock down as much as you can, and then monitor as much as you can. Well, if you don't have Shield, maybe you have to have more active human monitoring in your org because you don't have the monitoring that you can have with with Shield. Maybe you have to put in some other secondary check mechanisms. I mean, you could go as far as putting a lightning component on a page that renders, and then that could let you know when a record was viewed, and you just have to have a table it writes to that every time that page is rendered. But that's not going to stop you, of course, from if someone's going to view it from use SQL, SOQL, or from the API and things like that. But I think, unfortunately, Shield is expensive, but it's also the best thing there is out there to really know what's going on in your org and also what the packages are doing. You can actually use Shield to understand what callouts are happening with the packages, other things like that, and those are things that are also something you should be looking at. So, okay, one more question here. What would this typical? that doesn't make sense. I'm sorry, who asked that? Would you, this is now far more advanced than the typical resume ask of a Salesforce admin. Oh, yes. I mean, I definitely say this is a lot more advanced than what a typical admin is. But also at the same time, you want to think about here, this is why we're doing these sessions. So I'm giving you a lot of the tools, kind of giving you the framework that you can use. And then you can come on in, ask questions here. If you have other questions, you're starting to implement this. I think that's really what this is for. We actually are going to look to open up a forum later as well to help with that. I would say also talk to your IT security team. They're going to know these frameworks too. It's not just a siloed approach. There's a lot of people, I'm sure, in your organization, if you're a larger organization, that understand some of the stuff, and you can talk to them as well. So don't, reach out to the community. I think that's another thing you can do. It's just try to get help if you just don't, if you're not comfortable doing this stuff, but it's not an excuse not to do it. All right. Okay, so this is kind of a wrapping up. This is, I believe, this is kind of the end. And so this is just really your checklist to say, okay, what do I need to do? What's actionable here to get started today? The first is, audit all of your connected apps. Most importantly, that's where all these breaches have come from. Ensure this is actually talk that I believe we're having in a couple weeks, or maybe I forget exactly, but it's like ensuring you're not sharing your integration users for your AP, especially with your vendors. Don't set admin credentials for your integration user unless it's a backup for something or something like that else. And even that, you should only give access for what you're backing up. I think that's one of the biggest issues I've seen a lot of times is think if you have one vendor that gets breached and you're sharing that credentials and everyone's an admin, well, who is responsible? How do you know? And also think of it this way: your vendors have access to all your data. Do you really want them to have access to all of your data? So this one's a very important one to pay attention to. Enabling multi-factor authentication everywhere. Think about again back to Disney, back to Coke. All these things could have been avoided if they had multi-factor and IP-based security for their users and the connected apps. Also remember in session settings, there's a setting that says enable IP security for every request, because by default, IP security is only enabled for logins. It's not enabled after login. So if you check that box, then after every single request, will that IP security be enforced? Start, even if you don't have Shield, start to actually monitor for suspicious events. Audit your users. Look at your setup access log. Look, put that, start trying to see other things you can do. Use your backups if you don't have Shield to just look at for change events that are happening. Looking at your connected app screen to see what kind of connected apps, not the installed packages, but there's a connected app usage screen in Salesforce, looking at what kind of connected apps have been attached to your org. Doing an audit of all your OAuth connections for all your users. What have they authorized already that shouldn't have been authorized in the past? Run your guest user access report, ensuring that, and run security health check in Salesforce. So that's going to help understand guest user access report, what data your guest user, the publicly user, has access to. Because that's what happened in the breach I was part of. It was a misconfiguration in the guest user, and an unauthenticated user got access to data in Salesforce. Training your users to detect, phishing, social engineering, phishing, all those kind of attacks. Understand, then testing them again in a Salesforce way. Having someone give them a fake call, see if they are fall victim to that. Trying to get in, if it's a case, if it's your support people, send in cases that look like real cases with a fake phishing URL. See if they click on that URL. Implement data backup in Salesforce. If you don't have it, you need to have that immediately, because data backup is going to be how you recover from a lot of these attacks. And then, as we were talking before, virus scanning and scanning for phishing of URLs in Salesforce for phishing. If you have a scanner in place, and when you click on that URL and it scans it immediately and then blocks your user, it's a lot better than someone clicking on that link and something bad happening. And then, create Salesforce specific incident response plans and start to use this response lifecycle as we pointed out here. I think that's, the really best thing. Look this up. If you look up on NIST, just look up threat response lifecycle. There's a lot of documentation on it. And of course, everything we've talked about here, just even if you don't have, the plan immediately, at least just start thinking about it in that way. So if you have things, other types of security applications and they're just sending an email alert, think about how can we make it better so that just start the first phase, so or the second phase, that email alert. How do you make it so that email alert is something better? How do you make it so that that's actionable? So someone, once they get the alert, is actually going to do something, and they're not just going to ignore it for a week or two, or never even look at it. Then you can move through those phases little by little. So preparation first. Make sure your org is hardened. Now look at all your alerts. Figure out how you can better make those actionable. Then start cataloging. How do you lock? What are all the ways that you could lock out an attacker once they're in your system? There's, that's your containment and your eradication. Then think about, what you would do recover if you have it. Draw out different types of scenarios that you would see when there's an attack happening. Think about, then actually, just like with your IT teams that do disaster recovery exercises, perform different types of scenario-driven disaster recovery exercises. Pretend there's a breach, and then start acting on your plan. Does your plan work? Or are there holes in it? Did everyone do what they were supposed to do? So these are kind of the things that you really, should be thinking about as you start applying this. So my favorite quote here, just came up with it. If it's very familiar, if you remember Smokey the Bear, but only you can prevent and contain data breaches in Salesforce. Brought to you by Cody and Astro. All right, time for Q&A and discussion for anyone that wants to, ask questions. The forum is open. Also, while we're doing that, we're going to open up links if you want to, get a copy of my book, Securing Salesforce Digital Experiences. There's more security resources on the quote code to learn more about things we've been talking about. Also, we're running a survey right now, and giving away, I believe it's $400 or $500 gift cards for a survey to get people's insights on one of the breaches that happened recently. This would be really helpful, and we'll be sharing the results in a later session if you would be willing to participate. All right, great. Forum is open. Anyone have any questions? Feel free just to speak up, or you can ask it in the QA. And actually, it looks like we have one right here already from Dan again. So you said, you assume the new permission, you must be an admin to install a package, checks if you have modify all data. What do you think about having a transaction security policy to block the installation of packages? I mean, I don't know about the modify all data or not with the permission. I don't know if it's specific to, I I know there's just a little bit of information on it right now, but I don't know if it's specific to just the managed packages, or you also have to modify all data in addition as part of that permission. But I would hope that it has some, I think that I would actually personally would hope that it specifically separates the modify all data from the packages, just saying you cannot install any managed package or create any kind of OAuth connection if you are not an admin. And then it would just say like the admin needs to um, approve this, for example. But also, I think, even if an admin were to install the package, I think it would be great to have a policy that could block the installation of packages, for even certain admins, or certain cases, like depending on if the package has been approved by Salesforce or not, or other kind of circumstances. So,
Yeah, I was kind of thinking, Matt, about lower level sandboxes where you might have developers that are admins and you want to more tightly control their ability to install packages at a lower level sandbox. Maybe a transaction security policy on top of it might be a good thing that says, hey, do not disable this under risk of termination or something,
Yeah. Actually, that's even a great idea. You just gave me an idea thank you. I'll credit you for this, and Tristan will remember for another session, is sandbox security that we should talk about as well. I've worked at a lot of organizations where developers cannot be admins of a sandbox that actually has real data in it. Like the larger deal, they only are admins of their own developer box. And then once production data starts being introduced into that org, then it is treated no different than a production org. So everything that is set in your production is the same way. I've even seen it as far as they have monitoring tools in their sandboxes, just the same way they would have monitoring tools in production when there's production data in those orgs. And I think that's really how that would need to be treated in those lower environments. Because also same thing with the security policy there. If they don't configure it in those lower environments, just like today, how they don't configure, a lot of companies don't configure so their devs aren't admins, then you're going to have the same problem.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, definitely sandboxes are a great attack vector since often there's lower level of scrutiny on security. So, yeah, love to see that future session, Matt.
Yeah, same here. That's one I always tend to forget about is the sandbox security. And I think there's so many. I've either seen organizations that are very, very good with their sandbox security, or even the ones that go way even too far. And then you have the other spectrum where they're basically just treating it like a test system, even though it actually has production data in it, where it really is a production system. You just don't think of it that way. So I'm gonna open up some more people here to talk that joined a little bit late. Does anyone else have any other questions they would like to ask? Feel free to just speak up. I see Rachel's on here. All right. Well, if nobody else has any questions, then we can go ahead and wrap up for the day. But feel free to reach out to me directly if you have any other questions that you want to answer in between. And if not, also let me know if there's any other topics you would like to hear that we've on these sessions, just like Dan just brought up, because happy to add some more into the queue. But thank you so much for everyone's time today. And I hope you have a nice rest of your week.
Thanks, Matt, for doing this.
Thank you.